Philip.
Yes,
How are
Philip.
you?
How are you doing?
Very good to meet you.
Pleasure meeting you too. Well,
So
it's
what?
a pleasant surprise for both of us, huh? Old
It is.
soldier of yesteryear.
It is. It is. So, what part of town do you live in?
I live in Richmond.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
I just moved there almost 5 years ago, but I live in Houston for about almost 37 years now.
Wow, 37.
Because I came here in 1975 at the time where South Vietnam collapsed. So I did everything. I loved to go back teaching, but I was unable to do so. So I did a little bit of everything.
Oh, very good.
Yeah,
very
to
good.
take care of my family.
Very good. Yeah, in '75, I remember the Saigon fell, and all the refugees moved here.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them moved to Houston. And I have a funny story. I used to run marathons in the 70s and 80s. And I'm out running one morning. A lot of the Vietnamese refugees were put in this area called Allen Parkway Village.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And there was a woman walking along with a traditional outfit. There was Lao Dai, is that what they call it?
Yeah, Lao Dai.
And there's some cooking going on, it smells, and all of a sudden, I just froze. Where am I? I mean, it was as if I was back there. I couldn't figure out exactly what is happening. So the Vietnamese contingent's been a big part of Houston history for a long time.
You know, a lot of people might not know it, but the main reason for a large contingent of Vietnamese refugees coming to Houston at the time in 1975 simply because we were just about 550 miles from Fort Chaffee in Arkansas.
Oh, well, okay.
At the time, there was the U.S. government set up 4 different so-called Indo-Chinese refugee resettlement camp.
Tell me about your service. You were in the Vietnamese Special Forces for 11 years, as I understand.
I was not drafted. I got a deferment by virtue of being the only son in the family, but I volunteered for military service right after I graduated from my alma mater, which was the largest Catholic university in Vietnam, the Vietnamese Special Forces Airborne, the Vietnamese equivalent of SOG. So during the course of the war, I was reported missing in action 3 times.
Really? Wow.
Yep. 2 times along the infamous Ho Chi Minh Trail back in 67, 68. And then near the end of the war, I was reported missing in action again the last time, a mere 1 month before the final collapse of South Vietnam. Mm. And I still suffer tremendously. I mean, luckily not psychologically. I don't have any kind of PTSD or anything as such, but physically, I still suffer from it because I still got a tiny piece of grenade shrapnel stuck in my spinal cord.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Since 1968, Bob. So I don't need a weather forecaster to tell me about the change of weather. So you're talking
and it can't be
about
taken out, huh?
Nope.
No, that's just...
Not even here. You were leatherneck in 65, 66, as I know.
Leathernecks is a term that is more specifically refers to the Marine aviators.
Right.
I was in something called Shore Party Battalion. In Vietnam, in the helicopter operations, we went in with the second wave of helicopters and organized the landing zones and did all of that. I was 23 years old as a Marine, a first lieutenant. A whole group of us, all the same age, who were at Pendleton together before we went over to Vietnam. And I've connected with a lot of those men and just talk about what it was like and the stories that I hear, the things that happened to them in that period of time.
Bob, you have to forgive me. I got just carried away, meeting a fellow soldier who's in Vietnam. I forgot to tell you one thing. From the very bottom of my heart, Bob, thank you very much for the service. Not of your country, our country here, but my own native land. Even though we lost it, but actually we did our duty, okay? And we make a very significant contribution. So thank you very much for the service. That you help us to stay alive for a few years, give us some decent interval. Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Philip, that's wonderful. I have to thank you for your service as well. I came back in 1966. I was out of the Marine Corps within a matter of days. I didn't talk to anybody. Nobody talked about it. I worked with men for years, and we didn't know we were veterans. One fellow was a helicopter pilot, worked for me for 5 or 6 years. I only found out he was a helicopter pilot 2 years ago. So this was a war that we all buried for lots of different reasons. About 15 years ago in a party somewhere, somebody heard that I was in Vietnam. A woman came up to me and said, "Thank you for your service." That's the first time anybody had ever said that. And I just started to tear up. I mean,
I can imagine that. You know, when you said that, I have goosebumps.
Yeah.
Because I understand the kind of treatment you guys got when you get back to, you know, from Vietnam, baby killer and that sort of things. And
Philip, the best part of that whole experience for me, the Marine Corps defined my life, but the best part of it is the strongest element in our human psyche is the warrior. This strong thing that we all have inside us. We have to call up when we have to do something very difficult. We have to call the warrior. And when countries go to war, they call upon a group of men and they train them how to be warriors and they teach you the whole thing. And the warrior is a very, very noble profession in lots of ways.
Absolutely.
We went back to Vietnam in 2005. A group of us were in Hanoi and we visited with the North Vietnamese Veterans Association. So these were the men we were fighting, all the same age. We sat around the table. They didn't speak English. We didn't speak Vietnamese. We talked through an interpreter. By the end of it, we were hugging each other. You know, warriors caught in a war neither understood in some fashion. It was the most powerful experience I've ever had in so many different ways.
Yeah,
so this whole idea of what it is. Having said that, you know, I say to a lot of my friends, this is a war that we all regret. You know, I'm not sure what we accomplished by it in lots of different ways, but the nobility of your performing your duties as a warrior is one of the most powerful things we can do in our lives, I think.
yeah,
in
I couldn't
enormous
agree
ways.
with you more, Bob.
Yeah.
I can agree with you more.
So tell me a little bit about yourself then in that whole experience.
Unfortunately, when we escaped Vietnam at the time in 1975 because of the chaotic situation, my wife and I were able to bring out 3 out of our 4 children. The oldest one was left behind because he was about 100 miles away in the Mekong Delta. And he suffered tremendously because of the very fact that not only I served in SOG, but also I was the sort of a semi-official intelligence analyst for SOG as well. So, you know, what happened to my son is indescribable. Even though he was only 10 at the time when we left him behind in 1975. They forced him, you know, to carry, like he was a sandwich, carry a sign in front of his chest and his back, saying in Vietnamese that this is the offspring of the hunting dog of American imperialism.
Ooh.
Or 10-year-old child. And he forced him to go on a minefield to clear, you know, all the mine with nothing but a bamboo stick. He almost lost, you know, both his legs. But luckily, in 1981, he escaped from Vietnam by walking all the way from Vietnam through the killing field of Cambodia.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it took him a few months to do so, but he did. And eventually, he ended up in the refugee camp in Thailand. So he was finally reunited with our family in just 2 days after Thanksgiving. You see, what an occasion to celebrate Thanksgiving by having.
What year was that?
It's in 1982.
Oh.
Yeah.
How is he doing today?
He was doing just fine.
Oh, good. Very good.
Oh, by the way, talking about our family, Bob, how many kids you have? How many
I have
grandchildren?
3 children.
Okay.
They're all on either side of 50, and I have 5 grandchildren.
Okay.
They're all spread around the United States.
All right.
Pretty much.
3 children and 5 grandchildren. You have a long way to catch up with me, Bob.
Is that right?
Absolutely. I have 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren.
Oh, gosh. It will be a long time before I have any great-grandchildren.
Yeah.
That's
I
for
told
sure.
you.
That's for sure. That's for sure. So, Philip, what do you think we accomplished in that war? I mean, you know, just 58,000 American men and women died.
It's
3.5 million Vietnamese died in the war. 20% of the Vietnamese population. What did we accomplish?
It's tragic. You know, become a cliche that it was the failure, it was the catastrophe, whatnot. But let me tell you from my perspective that your service or the ultimate sacrifice of more than 58,000 US soldiers were not in vain. Because after the collapse of South Vietnam, and also the kind of light domino effect, you know, with Cambodia and Laos, culminate by the hubristic attitude of the whole communist world at the time. You know, they thought that they became invincible. But you know what? Because of that, the West, the free world, get a wake-up call.
We lived in the U.S. in the 50s and 60s, and we enlisted because it was our obligation, and we flew halfway around the world and spent a year in Vietnam. All of you were there all the time. I mean, you were living that all day long. I mean, just in so many different ways. One of the things I felt when we went back in 2005 is a great admiration for the people and what they went through and how difficult it was for everybody.
I envy you too. You know, you said you were in a group of fellow Americans or Marines, you know, going back to Vietnam back in 2005. I didn't have a chance to do so. The communist government in Vietnam only allowed me to get back into the country for just 1 week in 1998 when my father was on his deathbed. Actually, 2 months after I left Vietnam, he passed away on Memorial Day weekend, May the 29th of 1998. They didn't allow me to go back to the country, and 14 months later, my mother passed away right on her patron saint day, Saint Anne. I'm a devout Catholic myself. They didn't allow me to go back to the country either.
Wow.
Even though we lost the war, you know, it's into the hands of the dictatorial or totalitarian regime nowadays, but still we accomplished something. And think about the potential of Vietnam in the future. A lot of young people without tragic memory of the war and that sort of things. And they are highly educated and in a way, you know, westernized and open up to with all kind of social media now. And they will become the best ally, not just for the US, but also for the free world in the future.
This has been a wonderful experience. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Philip.
Douglas MacArthur was one of my heroes, and I never forget what he said. He said, "Old soldiers never die, right? They just fade away." And I am the one who refused to fade away, Bob.
Is that right?
Yeah, I refuse to do so, to fade away, simply because I believe I'm gonna stay alive until the final chapter of the worldwide collapse of communism take place.
Well, Gandhi says that every oppressive regime that restricts personal freedoms ultimately fails. and I believe that as
Oh
well.
yes, absolutely, absolutely.
So you call me, and we'll have another meal and celebrate. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Hi, Cindy. I'm Katie. It's nice to finally meet you.
Yeah. Well, welcome.
Wow, this place is really nice.
Yeah, I've been here once before. I just
Have
like
you?
I like Italian food. It's one of my favorites.
I haven't been here yet, but I'm excited to try it.
Same.
So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, born and raised in Houston, and I love it here. So I'm a lawyer now, and I work at the courthouse with a federal judge, and
Wow.
it's been pretty fun so far.
Yeah. Well, I was born in Houston, and I got a degree in psychology, and I worked in public mental health for close to 10 years. And then I recently started working with veterans, actually, and helping them receive benefits for medical disabilities.
Have you always known you wanted to do that?
I mean, I've always been passionate about, working with veterans, and especially my dad works with veterans as well, for an organization called U.S. Vets, and they house and rehabilitate homeless veterans.
Did he serve in the war?
He did. He was in the military from 1968 to 1972. He was stationed in Da Nang, Vietnam, and he was in the Air Force.
Yeah, my parents were high school students when the war broke out. And,
Really?
My dad left right at the eve of the fall of Saigon, so we call it Black April. So that's the day he and his brother decided to leave by boat, and they didn't know where they were going, just out in the open sea. And we're just hoping something or someone will eventually pick them up. Like what happened when that 10th boat finally stopped. It was a U.S. merchant ship.
Yeah.
And luckily they picked up everyone in the boat and was able to take them to the Philippines, to like an Air Force base out there. And eventually he went from there to Guam, and then to Camp Pendleton in California for like a refugee camp there. And these were the stories I've heard about, like how harrowing it was to be out in the open sea for 10 days. And it's kind of funny because when I was in high school, I was looking forward to the week we touched on the U.S. Vietnam War. But on the day they talked about it, a student just kind of took over the conversation and just said, he was very opinionated. He kind of said, well, the U.S. shouldn't have been in the war for these reasons, things like that. And I was kind of taken aback because I didn't have an opinion formed yet. I didn't even know what the facts were, or where to base that on.
I don't think a lot of people did.
Yeah, and it was surprising because I was like curious about, I want to learn more from, an objective perspective, and just kind of see, well, if people were against the war in some way, were they also, anti-immigrant or anti-Vietnamese? Because it affected how I, kind of lived and carried my life.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, my dad even said, I asked him actually recently, I said, did you know what your stance was when you were entering the war? Did you know what you were going for? He said, I was just a teenager. I didn't really know. That I just, I think he was 19, and he didn't really know what his path in life was yet. And he was pretty certain he was going to get drafted. So he just ended up enlisting, but he didn't really talk about it much when I was a child. The only times he would ever reference it was if maybe we were watching a movie or something and Vietnam was depicted in a movie, and he would just say, oh, I've been there before. Oh, I was standing right there,
Yeah.
I was in that place before. But other than that, we really didn't talk about it until I was in college, and I had a history class where I had a project where I had to interview a Vietnam veteran. I was like, oh, my dad's a
that's
Vietnam
very
veteran.
interesting.
And so I ended up interviewing him, and that's really got where I learned more about it.
Same here. Actually,
yeah.
my senior year, we had an Asian American experience class at Rice, and that's when I interviewed my dad, because he's an immigrant to the U.S., about his experience. And the little details start coming out, and maybe they don't want to talk about it because it's such a rough experience and patch in their life.
And I do remember the first time I knew it was something pretty emotional for my family was when we went, I think I was in 7th grade, and we went to the Vietnam Memorial Wall. And my mom just, I don't think I'd ever seen my mother cry before. And she broke down in tears as soon as we got to the wall, just because there's so many names on that wall, you know, and it was overwhelming. And I just remember, I think I was 12 years old, and I was just like, why is my mom crying? I was confused.
Right. You're here on like a fun family vacation
Yeah.
to DC, and you're like, what's going on?
Exactly.
Yeah. My very first time in DC was when I was 16 years old. And I also went to the memorial and took a photo on a really clear day, and so it's like a reflection
Oh,
of
wow.
me there.
That's
And
amazing.
I brought the U.S. and the South Republic of Vietnam flags because, to me, that kind of capitalized everything in terms of these were the people for my country fighting a war in my parents' homeland.
Gorgeous.
Well, I know that from my perspective, had it not been for the war and the humanitarian outreach that the U.S. gave to so many refugees, I would not be here, because my parents met in the U.S. So they met at a wedding in Tennessee, of all places.
That's great.
And they eventually settled in Houston because there was a pretty sizable Vietnamese population out here. And they never left since, so they've lived in the U.S. longer than they have in Vietnam. And it's great to see them, you know, enjoy it here and being able to, you know, consider themselves like Vietnamese Americans and stuff
That's
like
great.
that.
Good.
Yeah.
That makes me happy. I like that.
You know, I will add that if you're in Houston on April 30th, they always have a Black April observation, kind of like a memorial to honor both the Vietnam vets and those who lost their lives in the war. And it's on Bel Air Boulevard. Have you been out to Southwest Houston?
I don't make it out to that part of town often, but you know, I am familiar with the area.
I kind of figured it's the way for the Vietnamese who came to America seeking freedom, like the immigrants and refugees, to honor those who fought in the war on the south side, because actually in Vietnam it's actually a celebration there because it's the North that won the war. But here it's a memorial, and people are, you know, mourning a loss, as well as people who lost their lives trying to cross the oceans to get to, you know, places like America. And I think a lot of times people always ask, well, you're second generation, Cindy. That means you were born here, you're far removed from the war. You know, these old folks are just, you know, looking backwards all the time.
Okay.
But I like to think that they're looking forwards because they're thinking about the future of U.S.-Vietnam relations. They're thinking about the people now, and like, even though there's a lot of economic development in Vietnam, they're also suppressing human rights issues there. So that's a big concern. Yeah, I would love to have you come next time.
I would love to. It is strange that the Vietnam veterans and the Vietnamese community, you know, don't come together more often. And same with what I was saying my dad does. They have events all the time at U.S. Vets.
Yeah.
You know, for the veterans there. They'll have fish fries and barbecues and you know, 5K walks and all kinds of fundraisers. And so I'd love for you to join me on one of those.
I think that'll be fun.
Yeah, well, let's make it happen.
Sure. Cheers to that.